Sad when even this looks better than most modern Western animation these days.
We opened at an Oden stand, basically a traveling bar where patriots could get drinks plus some various foods boiled in broth. This particular stand was getting some good business thanks to some likely underage customers in the Gangrene Gang and later Mojo and Fuzzy. Though don't worry officer, they're clearly not drinking alcohol or even hot sauce, but rather Ecto Cooler by the looks of it.
Say, could you save some for us? Halloween is around the corner, but we're not sure if they're gonna bring it back for the new movie.
But yeah, this was an interesting little setup with technically all the first villains of the PPG gathering. I mean, think about it, the Gangrene Gang were the first villains the girls fought in Whoop Ass Stew, Fuzzy debuted in the What cartoon pilot, and Mojo was the first villain of the TV series proper.
Now, of course, this could all just be one big coincidence, but it is an interesting setup for what's essentially this show's version of the Beatles episode. Which, by the way, I never really found to be that great of an episode.
It was fine, but nothing special in my opinion, just a bunch of barebone and obvious references to the Beatles.
I know it's Craig's favorite episode, but for me at least, that's how it belongs to.
Though this might have also been a reference to the Almost Got Him episode of Batman the Animated Series, you know, minus the got him part, as the girls managed to defeat all of them without even trying. In fact, comedically enough, they had become so jaded to crime fighting that they were doing other things at the same time.
Okay, maybe the real reason they're drinking Ecto Cooler is because Miyako drank all of the actual booze.
This would actually come into play as, after the villains rather amicably paid each other's bar tabs, they realized that they had kind of bonded because of it, and together that they might be able to defeat the complacent girls. Sure enough, they attacked the next day, and our heroines had even less motivation than the villains of Tropical Rouge.
On that note, it's worth mentioning that this episode's script was yet another work of longtime Precure writer Isamu Murayama, and it has all of his usual tropes, for better and for worse.
Yeah, for me, he tends to be a bit of a hit and miss writer. While his world building often is great along with his writing for villains, like in this episode, his main character writing, I think relies a little too much on them starting off as less than amiable characters.
I think from his perspective, he wants to write characters who can develop into inspirational figures, which I can totally understand. I wear this cordial to represent one of my favorite anime characters of all time, who started off as a bit of a wimpy little pushover.
The problem is, I think he often underestimates how much time and development it takes to make, say, a lazy chicken alien into something relatively likable. Other times, if there's no new characters available, he'll just revert established ones back a few spaces in their development. You could argue this was the case for the girls in this episode, with them being very unheroic and complacent, even though they really should have gelled as a team by now. However, I'm willing to give these characters in this particular show a pass. For one thing, this series is incredibly episodic, and there's not much of any sort of serious storyline that begs for consistent serialization.
Not to mention, the girls not wanting to be superheroines does kind of match up with some previously established lore, even if coincidentally.
Just a couple episodes back, it was established that crime fighting was eating into their sleep schedules, and they were becoming progressively more irritable. Thus, you could consider all of this just a continuation of that storyline. Heck, that episode ended with them also fighting Mojo.
So yeah, while I do have issues with Murayama overusing this trope in Precure to the point it leads to some inconsistent character development,
I'm fine with it here since it is a far less serious show, plus as we'll see, it does lead to a good self-contained arc for the girls here. Anyway, since they were in full jerk-off mode, the girls decided to quickly try to deal with the villains on their own. This of course was a big mistake, as their enemies managed to synergize very effectively.
well, it does look like something the Elite would try to pull off, and likely botch.
Which you are, why do you need a low blow? Someone tell me that!
One by one, they were taken out thanks to a combination of Mojo's tech, Fuzzy's brute strength, and the Gangrene Gang's ingenuity. As a result, they managed to trap the girls in a spaceship that Mojo launched, hoping to pull a Planet Hulk on them. With that, the first half of the episode ended with them celebrating with more Ecto Cooler. With the girls gone, the villains had free reign to do whatever they wanted, with the exception of being able to figure out who was in charge. Yep, like many Sinister Six-esque team-ups, the thing that ultimately took them down was a clashing of egos.
Hey look, it's every Congress ever. Again, this show remains surprisingly topical.
Though at least they're not breaking up because of a painfully obvious Yoko Ono stand-in. Mojo also pointed out that his rocket would take the girls as far as the fuel will allow, though I guess he didn't factor in the gravitational pull of the moon. Yeah, maybe next time you should splurge on some diesel there, dude. They still allow the girls to reflect on their selfish actions, as well as look for Momoko's missing ponytail. But yeah, this was a really nice scene that even kind of called back to one of Murayama's previous episodes, where the girls got a bird's eye view of what the city they needed to protect looked like. Only now, they had a slightly better view. Again, when he's not overcomplicating his stories, Murayama can turn out great hero tales like this, where the characters really come to appreciate and recognize what it means to be protectors of justice. With some literally wider perspectives, the girls decide to head home.
Hey girls, don't forget to take Saitama with you. Oh, never mind.
And after a pretty awesome scene of them re-entering Earth's atmosphere, they took on the villains who weren't exactly on the best of speaking terms. In particular, Mojo and Snake's combination had some issues.
This is what happens when you try and mess with the Gatai formations.
Moreover, the girls were familiar with their tactics, and thus were able to easily counterattack the pairings individually. Yeah, I think it would have been nice if we actually got to see the girls team up during some of these rematches, as their lack of teamwork was one of the major conflicts of the episode, and it would contrast nicely with the villains breaking down. Though they did at least use a little teamwork during their final takedown of the villains, but as usual with the show, it was just a quick beatdown as they returned the favor for their little moon trip. With that, the episode ended with the girls heading back to school to eat their lunches, while the villains continued their pointless leader debate. Again, very much like modern politics.
This was a really fun episode, as most villain team-ups should be, and it also did provide us with some good character building for our main heroines.
While I'm not always on board for Isamu Murayama's writing, as I do think he sometimes writes himself into a corner with characters who start off with too many negative traits, it worked here in a less serialized show, and especially in the context of the episode itself.
In some ways, I do like this better than the Beatles episode of the OG, as at the very least, the actual personalities of our villains were on full display here.
Whether or not it was a coincidence they went with the girls' first villains doesn't change the fact that it was nice to see at least some close approximation of these characters working off each other. Most Rogues Gallery team-ups work best when we get to see the antagonist personalities on full display. Thus, I honestly don't think they could have picked a better writer than Murayama, who's always seemed to have a bit of an affinity for the baddies. He managed to bring out both their endearing bar-drinking buddy side that made for a surprisingly cohesive team, followed by their hilarious egos clashing, bringing upon their downfall all in one episode. This was contrasted with the girls kind of going in the opposite direction. They started off the episode not just complacent with their superheroine duties, but also rather antagonistic towards each other. Again, you could argue this was Murayama reversing character development for the sake of a one-off conflict, as he would fall into this trapping with some of his future works, but I would say it works here, as again, there was at least some previously established context behind their jaded attitudes. Moreover, it did lead to a really good payoff with the girls acknowledging their mistakes and recognizing what they needed to protect. Good stuff that, while certainly not the deepest character writing for a villain-centric episode, again, Batman is still the reigning champ over that, this was still, overall, a really good episode for this series. These villains certainly know how to have a good time with just a few pints of Ecto Cooler.
Work on the final part of the Gold Princess review is about 70% done, so I might have something out by next week. Not gonna make any promises, as I do tend to make a lot of last-minute rewrites, but I'll still try to get it out as soon as I can. From there, we'll try and crank out some kind of Halloween video for the 29th of this month. Yeah, I just realized that the 31st is going to be a Sunday, which would end up clashing with my Tropical Rouge review of that day, so I'll shoot for the Friday before it instead. Still look forward to it, and until then though, for now my friends, and if you excuse me, I'm gonna go meet some friends for some drinks. What, you never tried to spike your Ecto Cooler?